Welcome to the Enneagram with Chelsea and Well. This is a positively deviant culture podcast anchored in the Enneagram. Today, we're continuing on with this series on the type 3, and we're focused in this episode on the paradox of the 3. So if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, head back to the initial episodes and get yourself up to speed because we are diving straight into the deep end.
And my every episode reminder to listeners is that this isn't a prescriptive fixed tool, and that our conversations are designed here to work with the material and ideas in an exploratory way. And all my years of experience with the Enneagram, my knowledge and my application continues to evolve. And that's what we're doing, is we're continuing to learn together.
And we invite you into that learning process. So we very much welcome your input, your questions. We're on social, we're on LinkedIn, find us. So to tee up this episode on paradox, I'm going to do a quick refresher of some of the high points of their core brilliance. First and foremost, that 3s have this natural ability to become what they believe. And another part of that is having substance, substantiating. And then the third part, or kind of the, tee up for this conversation, is really around their connection to truth. So while those are all such powerful and awe-inspiring attributes, and these things being the best strengths of the 3, when misused, become destructive.
Yeah, exactly. This is where we find the paradoxes for all of us, is that it's in these strengths where we find the opposite: incarnation and becoming, incorporation. Like, this is wildly powerful, and yet 3s often do the opposite. And the opposite is where it's only a projection or a signal for some substance, but there is no substance there. So if their gift is to create substance, the opposite occurs where things are actually empty and without any material. And this happens more internally in 3s, of course, right? Where it becomes entirely performative. So that there isn't anything real. There is no becoming. It's a performance that isn't actually what we think it is, right? They're performing and projecting an image or a way of being, or they're even performing and projecting substance when there is no substance actually there. So that's the paradox. And then you mentioned truth, and this is something that I think is really often forgotten about 3s, is just how connected the contact that they have with truth is the very reason that they're incredible deceivers and manipulators. They're the best. So, and what's, it kind of makes sense, right? Like, the best deceivers and manipulators are the ones that have to most deeply understand truth so that they can manipulate it enough. So that's when it goes wrong, right? This ability for 3s to be honest and connected to what is most deeply authentic and most deeply true and real, misused becomes, lying and deceit and manipulation and the worst kind of calculations and the worst kind of performances, in the sense that they're empty and fictional. That's a definite paradox. Another one is, we consider what it is to become is a wholeness, right? What it is to become a whole human. And what 3s do in a paradoxical state is they'll become fractionalized, compartmentalized, right? They're not whole. They're in little pieces, right? That are all reflecting something tiny, like a signal, but not real.
Yeah. The performative aspect, going back to that, emptiness is the word that came to mind, where there's signals, bells and whistles. And we talked earlier about this confidence state. I experience 3s. They are incredible at articulating ideas and leading people, right? And we've also talked about leaders and even US culture being a representation of this performative state. And when you start to peel back the layers, oftentimes, or I shouldn't say oftentimes, I think sometimes you find that the center is empty and all of the beauty that's, it looks so perfect, almost to the state where someone might not want to really challenge what's at the core of it. And in some cases, that's what's happening, is there isn't much substance within it.
Yeah, it's a mirage. And threes are excellent at creating mirages in this paradox sense, right? Like, of course, in their brilliance, it's fully real and an enormous amount of substance. And in the paradox, it's just a mirage. It's completely fake. The other thing you briefly mentioned was leadership, which I wanted to get to, which is, their brilliance and amazing leaders, the best of all of us. And yet the paradox is spectatorship. And threes are very prone, to all of this, right? All the paradoxes is such an interesting place for all of us, that how can you be so great, at true, authentic leadership where you are invested and you are embodied, and yet that can move to just spectatorship and just watching. And this is a huge problem, I think, in America. We had an episode on America as being a three culture, right? We become a people of spectators where we're no longer invested and we're no longer taking on the stakes. We're absent of our own stakes, right? There are no stakes. So being a spectator is incredibly dangerous when we're talking about humanity and belonging to a group of people, and when we consider dignity and all of these things, right? Like spectatorship is not great. So that's a huge opposite and paradoxes of leadership, is to be a spectator instead.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the wholeness and the compartmentalization too. So can you expand on when we see these paradoxes at play, ones we've talked about, or if you want to dive into that one as an example, where is this coming from? Why do these paradoxes present?
Yeah, we touched on this in the beginning, and I try to mention this all the way through, is that our brilliance is always present, right? It is the gift that we're given. It is essential to our kind of existential jobs in the world, right? Like the things that we are charged to do, in the world. And when we misuse those strengths and those brilliance, this is where the paradox is located, which is the opposite. So it 100% makes sense that these strengths, these gifts, and these brilliances, when they're misused and misapplied, become the opposite. And it's because they're so strong. They have such weight in us, these particulars, that we go to them all the time because they're our strengths. And so when we're missing the mark and we're not using them appropriately or effectively or precisely, they become its opposite.
They're very powerful forces. And when you're not aware of what's happening, you're just kind of acting on this subconscious level with these natural strengths that have either provided for you or damaged, relationships or intentions in the past, then you miss out on an opportunity to self-correct, right? And you miss out on an opportunity to gain more balance and more wholeness and to be more deliberate with those strengths.
Understanding the paradoxes in us help us to be more responsible with our strengths and to be more attentive to when we might be misusing them, misapplying them, or being imprecise. That's what's powerful about, for me anyway, and I think the people that I work with, this is true, and I think for you too, Chelsea, like these kind of insights into how our strengths can be eroded to become the very opposite of what they were designed to do.
What other paradoxes exist within the three?
We've talked about one of their core brilliances is being able to meet the moment perfectly, right? And I love that. And the paradox is when they're entirely avoidant. They avoid everything, meaning where they, which is, part of disintegrating to a 9, right? Which is that avoidant piece. So they miss the opportunity so that they actually cannot meet the moment at all. And there's this deep handicap because it ends up going into avoidance. And then another one that's, I think, particularly interesting in terms of the American culture in the threeness is that threes are gifted with being highly productive. They're not the only ones, but their ability to be super productive and efficient and doers. The paradox there is where the concern and the energy and the ability that they have at their best is to be productive. And how that transforms in a negative way is where they end up becoming a product. Actually being a human being that can engage in holistic and all of the things which actually are more deeply productive, where that ends up being cut and reduced to the only thing that you're becoming or that we are is a product itself. There's so much overvalue on productivity. You end up becoming a product and you lose the contact with what that humanity and truly being productive in the world is.
Yeah, this over-index towards achievement and success at all costs and being that workhorse, right? Like working yourself and wearing it as a badge of honor and actually gaining status from it in some ways based on our culture and what we value. I would summarize that by becoming a doing, not a being, right? Like where the whole point of you is just to do and continue to achieve and continue to check items off your list and produce and produce. And it is this machine like, it's a slippery slope, right? Like that's a dangerous place to go where you lose connection with what do I even want to become? What's important to me? I think it's really easy to fall into because our culture prioritizes that. And
our three culture prioritizes productivity over becoming, which is ironic, right? This is the paradox. This is exactly the paradox, is that becoming is actually the most essential essence of a three. And it's eroded or corrupted into just being productive, which is even further eroded into just becoming a product. So that the three culture, the negative this side of a three, this paradox is that it's where it's forcing themselves and others to just being a product.
Yeah, it reminds me of the stories where people retire and they look around at this success, this empire, this career that they build, and they realize that none of that actually meant anything to them when they consider other values, and that it's all empty and it was all for naught. And what a missed opportunity, right? Like what a better opportunity to engage how we can become full humans along the way, not in hindsight.
Yes. And the invitation to a three is to redefine their definition of success. Most threes that are super integrated and well adjusted have done this. And this is actually the same invitation to all 9 types. The very things that we need and our core drives are after that we consider more core to life and death. Our definitions around them are completely sophomoric and incredibly limited and reductionary, right? So for threes in this instance is to redefine and to expand the definition of success, which fundamentally the biggest form of success is becoming an amazing fucking human being and to helping others become something amazing and inspiring. And yet that doesn't feel like an achievement to threes. And it's because our society doesn't recognize those internal ontology that I usually say ontology over product, right? We prioritize products and money and external achievements over our own ontology, over becoming. And yet we intellectually understand, at least we should remind ourselves, like as all humans should remind ourselves, that the ultimate achievement and probably the most challenging thing ever to achieve is our own self. And if we were to recognize this, and if the threes were able to lead us into this place, maybe our cultural values would change so that we elevated that as the ultimate achievement and the ultimate ideal.
And this is so much of why we're doing this, why we're having these conversations, is because there's so much power in this. Gosh, so cliche to say knowledge, but that's really what it is, these lenses. And it's not an easy topic to really wrestle to the ground because of the nuance, the complexities. And we're only, 3 parts in, right? Core brilliance. And then we talked about the movement parts, but this paradox really helps us unpack and unload what's happening for threes. And by the way, we all have some of this in us so that we can chart a path towards becoming more whole and more integrated.
Preach. That's exactly it.
Our next episode is on the threes around us and how we can lean into them and leverage their strengths and learn from them, as well as how to recognize the threeness within each one of us. So thanks for listening. And if you are interested to engage with us, reach out to us on LinkedIn.